Picture yourself in a stadium packed with thousands, the air thick with anticipation. But instead of the roar of approval you might expect, what fills the space is something else entirely, a wave of disapproval so unified, so unrelenting, that it transcends mere disagreement and becomes something closer to moral verdict. This is not orchestrated theater. This is not the product of some social media campaign hatched in the digital shadows. This is the sound of democratic expression in its most primal form, delivered without filters, without intermediaries, without apology. And what makes this moment historically significant is not simply its volume, but its spontaneity, the organic convergence of individual judgments into collective witness. The footage has now circulated across continents, shared millions of times, because it captures something that carefully crafted statements and diplomatic cables cannot. The visceral reaction of ordinary people to leadership that has strayed beyond the boundaries of what they will tolerate. We are watching something rare in the annals of American foreign policy, the simultaneous unraveling of domestic patience and international forbearance. While protests have erupted across American cities and European capitals, while diplomatic tensions surrounding Greenland have escalated from curious speculation to genuine alarm, one moment has crystallized the broader sentiment with uncommon clarity. That viral clip of an arena full of people expressing their unmistakable disapproval represents more than a fleeting embarrassment. It represents the surfacing of a fundamental disconnect between how power conceives of itself and how it is actually perceived by those upon whom it ultimately depends. The significance lies not in the event itself. Sports venues have witnessed political expressions before, but in what it reveals about the deteriorating relationship between American leadership and the broader democratic world. Consider the trajectory that brought us to this juncture. For generations, American foreign policy, whatever its flaws and however much its execution might be debated, operated within certain understood parameters. Alliances were cultivated, not casually threatened. Sovereignty was respected, not openly questioned. The language of diplomacy, even when it masked harder realities, acknowledged that international order rests upon mutual recognition and reciprocal restraint. What we are witnessing now is the substitution of these norms with something altogether different, a foreign policy approach that treats long-standing allies with the same transactional contempt once reserved for adversaries, that views territorial integrity as negotiable based on perceived strategic advantage, that mistakes belligerence for strength and disruption for decisiveness. The confrontation over Greenland exemplifies this shift with particular clarity. Here is a territory that has been part of the Kingdom of Denmark for centuries, inhabited by people who have never expressed any desire to alter their political status, situated within a security framework that already provides the United States with substantial military access and cooperation. The rational approach would be to strengthen existing arrangements, to deepen the cooperative relationship that already serves American interests quite adequately. Instead, what the world has witnessed is a campaign of rhetorical aggression, veiled threats about economic coercion, and casual dismissal of Danish sovereignty, all in pursuit of an objective that makes no strategic sense and serves no genuine American interest beyond the gratification of imperial fantasy. Subscribe now, because what's unfolding isn't just politics as usual, it's a fundamental shift in how the world responds to American power, and you won't want to miss what comes next. When Canada's Prime Minister was asked about this situation, his response deserves careful attention, not for its drama, there was none, but for its precision. Mark Carney did not engage in rhetorical escalation. He did not personalize the dispute or indulge in the kind of performative outrage that often substitutes for substance in contemporary political discourse. Instead, he articulated a position of crystalline clarity. Greenland's future belongs to the people of Greenland and to Denmark, full stop. This was not merely diplomatic courtesy. It was a reassertion of principles that form the bedrock of the post-war international order. The principle that sovereignty is not subject to the whims of more powerful neighbors, that territorial questions are resolved through democratic processes and mutual agreement, not through pressure and intimidation. Carney went further, invoking Canada's obligations under the NATO treaty, specifically referencing Articles 2 and 5. This was strategic communication of the highest order. Article 5 establishes the principle of collective defense. An attack on one member is an attack on all. Article 2 commits members to strengthening free institutions and promoting stability and well-being. By anchoring his response in these treaty provisions, Carney accomplished several objectives simultaneously. He reminded the world that Denmark is not isolated, that any destabilization of the Arctic region would activate alliance commitments, and that there exist institutional structures specifically designed to resist exactly the kind of unilateral adventurism now being contemplated. The broader pattern emerging across the democratic world deserves recognition. Leaders are not responding to American unpredictability with their own instability. They are responding with what might be called strategic steadiness, reinforcing alliances, reaffirming commitments, preparing for various contingencies while maintaining open channels for cooperation where it remains possible. This is not weakness. It is the application of institutional strength to counter individual volatility. It represents a collective judgment that stability, predictability, and respect for established norms constitute genuine strength, while erratic behavior and contempt for allies constitute weakness regardless of how loudly they are proclaimed. The protests spreading across continents reflect this same judgment. People are not simply reacting to specific policies, though many of those policies are indeed alarming. They are reacting to something deeper, a style of leadership that treats democratic consultation as weakness, that views international cooperation as constraint rather than force multiplier, that substitutes dominance for influence and assumes that power alone, absent legitimacy, can achieve lasting results. The historical record suggests otherwise. Power without legitimacy can coerce compliance, but it cannot build alliances. It can demand obedience, but it cannot inspire cooperation. It can threaten consequences, but it cannot create the conditions for sustained strategic success. The diplomatic confrontation over Greenland has exposed fault lines that extend far beyond the Arctic Circle. When a sitting president suggests, even hypothetically, that military force might be employed to acquire territory from a NATO ally, we have departed the realm of conventional diplomatic provocations and entered territory that requires clear-eyed assessment. The historical parallels are not subtle. Throughout the 20th century, the international community established, through bitter experience and at tremendous cost, that territorial aggression is incompatible with peaceful order. The post-war settlement, for all its imperfections, rested on the principle that borders could not be redrawn through force or intimidation. This principle has been violated certainly by Russia and Ukraine, by various actors in different conflicts, but it has never been violated while claiming to represent Western values or alliance solidarity. What makes the current situation particularly troubling is not merely the content of the rhetoric, but the casual manner in which it is deployed. Threatening tariffs against allies unless they agree to territorial concessions represents economic coercion of a type usually associated with authoritarian regimes, not democratic partners. Speaking of military options against countries with whom we have defense treaties inverts the entire logic of those alliances. These are not merely diplomatic faux pas or examples of unconventional communication style. They represent fundamental misunderstandings of how power actually operates in a world of sovereign nations and how alliances function when they rest on more than simple force. The response from Denmark and Greenland has been instructive. They have not responded with equivalent rhetorical aggression. Instead, they have patiently explained repeatedly that Greenland is not for sale, that its future will be determined by its inhabitants, and that existing security cooperation already provides the United States with substantial presence and influence in the region. They have offered expanded cooperation, additional access, deeper partnership, everything, in fact, except sovereignty. This is not obstinacy. It is the defense of principles that once abandoned cannot easily be recovered. If wealthy nations can simply purchase territory from less powerful neighbors, if alliances mean nothing when strategic desires conflict with treaty obligations, if sovereignty is conditional upon the sufferance of stronger powers, then we have returned to a world where might makes right and international law is merely the preference of the powerful. Members of Congress, to their credit, have begun to recognize the danger. Lawmakers who met with Danish and Greenlandic officials reported that their counterparts were genuinely bewildered, struggling to understand why a cooperative relationship was being threatened over something they had repeatedly made clear was not negotiable. The contrast is stark. On one side, confusion and genuine alarm; on the other, persistence in pursuing an objective that serves no identifiable American interest. The financial implications alone border on the absurd. Estimates suggest that any acquisition, were it even possible, could cost hundreds of billions of dollars. This in a country where debates over healthcare funding, infrastructure investment, and social programs founder on concerns about fiscal responsibility. The disconnect between proclaimed priorities and actual behavior could hardly be more pronounced. Senator after senator has made clear that there exists no support, even among the most hawkish members, for military action against a NATO ally. This is not partisan opposition. This is the reassertion of basic strategic sense. The notion that the United States would benefit from alienating allies, spending resources it does not have, and violating principles it claims to uphold, all to acquire territory that would provide no strategic advantage beyond symbolic satisfaction, collapses under the slightest scrutiny. Yet the rhetoric continues day after day, creating genuine diplomatic crises where none need exist and undermining relationships that took generations to build. The global response has evolved from bemusement to concern to something approaching coordinated resistance. This resistance does not take the form of military preparation or economic retaliation. It takes the form of institutional reinforcement. NATO members are reaffirming their commitments to collective defense. Democratic allies are strengthening their consultative mechanisms. International institutions are being reminded of their purposes and responsibilities. This is how mature democracies respond to volatility, not with equivalent chaos, but with structural stability. The goal is not confrontation, but resilience, not escalation, but endurance. Public sentiment has evolved in parallel with diplomatic positioning. The arena moment that went viral represents something more significant than a crowd's disapproval. It represents the public face of a private judgment that has been forming across the democratic world, that American leadership has become unreliable, that promises cannot be trusted, that today's alliance might be tomorrow's target. This is catastrophic for any nation that depends, as the United States does, on its network of partnerships and alliances to project influence and protect interests. Military power matters, certainly, but it is alliance structures, diplomatic relationships, and institutional cooperation that translate raw power into sustained strategic advantage. When those relationships erode, power becomes brittle, influence becomes transient, and vulnerability increases regardless of military capacity. The pattern that has emerged over these months tells a coherent story, and it is not a story of strength triumphant. It is a story of isolation growing, trust eroding, and the gap widening between how leadership perceives itself and how it is actually perceived by the world it claims to lead. The protests in American cities, the demonstrations in European capitals, the diplomatic resistance from allied governments, the viral moments of public disapproval, these are not disconnected phenomena. They are the visible manifestations of a fundamental loss of confidence in American leadership's judgment, restraint, and commitment to shared values. Consider what has been sacrificed in pursuit of objectives that make no strategic sense. The relationship with Canada, our longest undefended border and one of our most important trading partners, has been strained by casual threats of annexation and equally casual dismissal of sovereignty. The relationship with Denmark, a loyal NATO ally that has fought alongside American forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, has been poisoned by demands that violate basic principles of international law. The broader Atlantic alliance, which has been the cornerstone of Western security for three-quarters of a century, has been subjected to the kind of rhetoric once reserved for adversaries. And for what? For the fantasy of acquiring territory that provides no benefit we do not already possess through cooperative arrangements, for the satisfaction of making demands that everyone knows cannot and will not be met, for the appearance of dominance that, upon any serious examination, reveals itself as merely the appearance. The damage extends beyond specific relationships to the perception of American reliability itself. If alliances mean so little that they can be threatened over symbolic desires, if treaty obligations can be so casually dismissed, if today's partner can become tomorrow's target based on nothing more than whim, then rational actors will begin to hedge against American volatility rather than rely upon American partnership. This process is already underway. European nations are discussing security arrangements that reduce dependence on American guarantees. Asian allies are diversifying their strategic relationships. Middle Eastern partners are recalculating their alignments. This is not anti-Americanism. This is prudent risk management in the face of demonstrated unreliability. The arena moment that captured global attention reflects this reality. Those thousands of people expressing their disapproval were not making a partisan statement about American domestic politics. They were making a judgment about leadership that has forfeited moral authority through its own behavior. The sound that filled that stadium was not organized protest, it was organic rejection. The collective voice of people who have concluded that they are witnessing not strength but weakness, not confidence but insecurity, not strategy but impulse. This judgment, once formed, is extraordinarily difficult to reverse. Trust takes years to build and moments to destroy. Credibility, once lost, cannot simply be reclaimed through assertions of dominance or displays of power. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is the disconnect between how seriously the world is taking these developments and how seriously they appear to be taken by those making the threats. When Allied leaders invoke NATO treaty provisions, they are not engaging in diplomatic theater. They are preparing institutional responses to genuine concerns. When lawmakers express alarm, they are not simply posturing for political advantage. They are recognizing real dangers to American interests and international stability. When crowds react with visible disapproval, they are not merely expressing partisan preferences. They are rendering democratic judgment on leadership they find wanting. The path forward requires recognition of certain fundamental realities. First, that alliances are not constraints, but multipliers of national power. Second, that sovereignty is not negotiable based on strategic desire or perceived advantage. Third, that international order, however imperfect, provides the framework within which American interests are best secured. Fourth, that leadership requires not merely the possession of power, but the wisdom to employ it effectively and the restraint to recognize its limits. These are not abstract principles. They are practical requirements for any nation that seeks sustained influence in a world of sovereign states and shifting balances. The global backlash we are witnessing is not evidence of the world's weakness, but of its strength, the strength to resist pressure, to defend principles, to maintain institutional integrity in the face of volatility. The arena did not merely reject a person, it rejected an approach to leadership that treats cooperation as weakness and dominance as strategy. This rejection will have consequences that extend far beyond any single political career or administration. It will shape how America is perceived, how willing partners are to cooperate, and how capable the United States is of achieving its objectives through anything other than coercion. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this marks a permanent shift in how the world views American leadership, or can trust be rebuilt? Your perspective matters, and this conversation is just beginning. The viral moment from that arena will be remembered not as an isolated embarrassment, but as a symptom of a broader crisis, a crisis of credibility, of judgment, of understanding how power actually functions in a democratic world. The booing was not the problem. The booing was the diagnosis. And until the underlying condition is addressed, until leadership recognizes that strength without legitimacy is merely force, and force without wisdom is ultimately weakness, the international isolation will continue to deepen, the alliances will continue to fray, and the gap between American pretensions and American reality will continue to grow. The world is delivering its verdict. The only question is whether anyone is listening.